Hi, Kieran Stone here from Project RAWcast. The tutorial I have for you today is all about the levels adjustment layer in Photoshop. I'll give a brief introduction about what all the different functions do, but also go over how I tend to use levels in my workflow as well. But if you haven't already, make sure you head over to projectrawcast.com, sign up to our mailing list so you can be kept up to date with all the latest tutorials, episodes, our workshops, and any new blog posts as well. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this video as well. So we'll start off with this image here of the back roads of New Zealand. It's not a bad image, it's a bit flat. It is a straight out of the camera raw file. So we'll see what we can do with just a simple levels adjustment to start off this image here. So if I click on the levels adjustment layer here, which is denoted by this little symbol, or you can go to your adjustment layers menu here and select levels, and you'll be given this little interface. So you can see how it's given us the histogram of the entire image. So we've got our complete black over here and our complete white over this side. And we've got some little toggles on the left, right, and in the middle, and some more down here. And we've also got some little eyedroppers here. So what all these different things represent is here, with this slider on the left here, this is going to be setting the new black point to the image. So wherever you move this, it's saying to Photoshop that this is the new area where the image is going to be completely black. So if you move it too far to the right, it's going to start turning everything to the left of this point completely black, which means you'll end up with areas of just total black. And the same on the right here. If you move this to the left, that is telling Photoshop that this is the new white point. So anything to the right of this is going to be changed to complete white. So if you bring that up too much, you're just going to end up with huge areas of white in your image. And the little toggle in the middle here is your midpoint, and that's always set to 1, no matter how much you move these sliders here. And that's going to represent the gain of the image, or the midpoint of the image. So it's going to kind of set your exposure level. If you move it to the left, it's going to effectively increase the exposure, and if you bring it to the right, it's going to decrease the exposure. And this little bar down here is going to change how dark the image is going to be. So it's kind of doing the opposite of this, where you're telling everything to turn black. This is saying that anything that was black is now going to be kind of a gray. So if we go and just make some of this image completely black, this toggle here will mean that anything that was black is now capped at a dark gray or even a mid gray. So you can see here, any values that were completely black are now going to be around 50. So you can use that to brighten up any black areas there. And let's just make some areas completely white here. This toggle here will then set the limit to how bright your image can be. So if we move that right down to the left, it's now saying that areas that are completely white can now only be values of 190 here. So you'll see our whites are turning to a darker gray. So this is a way of limiting how bright or how white the image can be. Now, the most common way that levels tends to be used is by using these little eyedroppers here to set the black and the white point from somewhere that's in the image. For instance, if you click on your black eyedropper here, and one thing to note as well is you'll have a sample size selection up here. And at the moment mine's set to a 5x5 average. That means it's going to pick from my area of 5 pixels by 5 pixels and take the average brightness level of that. Probably best not to set it to point sample. having it for these ones at a low average, so either 3x3 or 5x5, depending on the resolution of your image, it's probably going to be the best in this situation. I'm going to stick to 5x5 at the moment, and the idea is to pick an area of your image that you think should be completely black, so have a value of 0 here. So I think somewhere in these trees looks fairly dark, so I'm just going to click the bottom of that tree there. And you can see that's changed my histogram to represent that. So that's a before, and that's the after. And the same with the white value here, or the white point. I'll pick somewhere in the image that should be completely white. And it can be a bit difficult when you've got sort of varying highlights through here. Might be tempted to say, well, I think the snow on these mountains should be completely white. So let's click on that. Now you can see by just kind of guessing where the black and the white point should be, it's actually changed our histogram here, and we've got this huge amount of clipping on the right here for our highlights, and a little bit on the blacks there. Might just change this to RGB, might be a bit easier to see. And if you do end up with this combing effect on your histogram, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It can make a big difference if you do extreme changes to your histogram, but especially if you're working in 16-bit or with 16-bit files, it's not going to make too much of a difference. But just be aware that the more you change around your levels, the more problems you might get in terms of posterization. So we've set our black point and our white point. This one in the middle here is to set your effectively your white balance of your image. So it's not going to change your value of your midpoint here, but it's pretty much saying, or you're picking what should be a gray point in the image, or a neutral color in the image. And we've got a lot of road here that looks fairly gray and neutral. And so I'm just going to click somewhere in there. And it hasn't changed the image too much. So that's the before, that's the after. It means that the image was fairly well color balanced, or the white balance was set correctly in the first place. So if we have a look at what this levels adjustment has done, it has brought out a lot more contrast in the image, but it's also clipped our highlights quite a lot. And we didn't really have too much control over what was happening there. So I'm just going to leave this levels adjustment layer off for the moment and create a new one. And I'm going to set these manually using these toggles. Now, you can either set it to just where you start to see that histogram fall off there, so you don't get any clipping. But you can see the before and after there, it's not really changing the image too much, and it still looks quite flat. So if you hold down Alt if you're using a PC, or Option if you're using a Mac, it'll bring up a clipping mask here, and you can see which areas of the image are turning completely black or starting to lose detail in specific color channels. So I don't mind if there's a bit of clipping in the black areas, or the black values here. The eye tends not to look for detail in dark areas anyway, so I might just set it to about 30 there, and leave that for the black point. And for the white point, again, holding down Alt or Option, you can see where the image is starting to clip. Now, I don't mind it clipping the highlights there in the clouds, because there wasn't a lot of detail in that area anyway. And you can always go back and just see whether it is making a huge difference. I don't think it's changing the image too much, so I'm just going to bring it up to there. So I'm pretty much moving it to where the histogram really starts. There's some outlying values here, but I'm just going to leave it at those, the main part of the histogram. And I can just have a look at the mid-tones. I don't mind the darker look, so I might just move that slightly over. and the before and after there. So that's just a quick way to improve the dynamic range of your image just using one levels adjustment layer. But there's always a lot more that you can do to an image rather than just using one levels adjustment. So we'll move on to another image here. So this one, as we can see from the histogram, doesn't really have much of a dynamic range, and it looks fairly underexposed as well. So if we went to our levels adjustment, and we'll just do what we did before, which was bring the white point right up until we're starting to clip there, and the same with the black point. Just bring that down to there. You can see that that has made an improvement to the image. It's definitely brightened it up, added a lot of contrast, and given us a much bigger dynamic range. But I find that by doing this, we've lost some of the mood of the image and some of the balance of the exposure as well. We've got a lot of dark area down here and a really bright area up here, and the eye tends to be drawn to the brighter areas of the image. So we're kind of losing a lot of what's going on down here. So one thing you can do is, I'll just turn that one off for the moment and create a new one. I'm just going to bring up the white point to just before it starts going completely white. I want to keep some of that grayness to the fog. And with the black point, I am going to bring that right to the end. So maybe about there to help with some of the contrast. But then I'm going to use this slider down here just to bring up the value of that black. So there's nothing that's completely black in the image. So now that's brightened up this shadow area. We've still got some bright highlights up here, but there's a much better balance between our shadows and our highlights. Our eyes aren't completely lost up in here. We can still see everything that's going on down in the foreground here. And it is a matter of preference. You might like the very high contrast look there, but I find just by doing something like this, it does keep the mood of the image as well. And you can always do further adjustments, say with selective color. You can always bring out some of the reds there to make some nice deeper reds, and that will help draw the eye back to the shadow area and away from the highlights a bit more as well. So you can see our before and our after, and show the before and the after of just the levels adjustment. So let's go to our final image here. Again, we have a fairly mainly underexposed image. When I first took this shot, I was trying to keep all the detail and the highlights in check. So you can see I haven't clipped the highlights. Probably could have gone a tiny bit more with the exposure, but I still have all the details in the image here anyway. So I'm going to create a levels adjustment layer. And again, here, if I just go to the edges of the histogram, then it really hasn't done anything to the image if I turn that on and off. So this area up here, this very tiny area of the image, is what's preventing me from brightening up everything else, because it's starting to clip when I move that. So, oops, that was off. So it's just starting to clip, which is why I can't go beyond there. So one thing I might do is completely ignore that region and just see where I'm clipping in the rest of the image. So you can see I'm starting to clip the windows and the top of the car on the right over there. So just until starting to clip those channels there. Again, they're quite strong highlights, so don't mind if they go a little bit white. You can see if I turn that on and off, that's made a much bigger difference to the rest of the image. But because I'm ignoring that area, I've lost a lot of detail in that bridge. So I can use my layer mask here. And if you're not sure what layer masks are, anything that's white means that the adjustment layer is affecting the whole image or that part of the image. and anything that you paint black onto it means that that's going to block the adjustment layer from taking place there. So with my layer mask selected and my brush selected, so you can press B, you can press D to change your whatever colors you've had to white and black. And I'm just going to switch my foreground and background color by pressing X. And with a soft edge brush, I'm just going to paint black over that area which I allowed to clip. So you can see that detail is being brought back into that area. And just paint white back onto some of that building there. Now I do recommend probably having better selections and layer mask, and a better layer mask than this. I've just really roughly painted it. You can see how that levels adjustment is only affecting, well, it's not affecting this bridge area anymore. If I turn that off, you can see that I've lost all that detail, but I've brought it back by blocking it out with the layer mask. So if you hold down Alt or Option and click on your layer mask, you can see what it actually looks like. So that's a good start, but another thing I want to do is focus on this area up here now and do a levels adjustment a bit more selectively for that area there. So I'm going to create a new levels adjustment, and I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click and drag my previous layer mask up to my new one. So that's going to copy the layer mask to my new adjustment layer. And I'm going to press Control or Command I to invert that layer mask. So now I'm only focusing on this region up here. And you'll notice that when I click between each of these levels adjustments, my histogram changes as well. And that's because this adjustment will only show you what is within your layer mask here. So here it's showing me the histogram of everything minus the sky and the bridge. And in this one, I'm seeing just the sky and the bridge. So you can use these selective layer masks and just control where you're clipping, or you can see the histogram of just those areas. So for my bridge here, I'm just going to bring in those white and black points there. So now that's just fixed up that one little area a bit better. But we don't have to stop there. This is where I start to use levels a bit more selectively. And I do like this sewer manhole cover here, but it seems a bit flat and it's not drawing the eye like I'd like it to. So I'm going to create a new levels adjustment layer, and I'm going to invert that layer mask by pressing Control or Command I, and then grabbing my brush tool, I'm going to set my color to white, and I'm just going to paint over this manhole cover. Now you can't see it doing anything, and that's because I'm painting onto the layer mask here. And you can either look at your layer mask and fix up any areas, but if you go over and you don't know what you've done, you can use the backslash key, and that'll bring up a quick mask, and you can just paint back, or actually see what you're painting on. So I'll just bring out more of that region there. Again, you can make better selections than this. I'm just doing some quick painting. You can use the pen tool, quick selection tool, anything you want to make better selections, but you'll get the idea from this. So I'll just press backslash again. And now with my levels adjustment, you can see that it's given me the histogram of just the manhole cover here. So if I bring up the white point, I don't want to go completely white because I don't think anything on that manhole should be completely white. And then just to bring the contrast back and the exposure back to something that fits the image a bit more, I'm going to bring down the midtones just until it matches the tone of the rest of the image. So somewhere about there. It's not too bad. You can see if I turn that on and off, you can see how it's really drawn attention to this manhole cover. It's increased its dynamic range and contrast and almost made it look more detailed as well. And you can see that it started to affect some of the bricks there. So I'm just going to grab my brush and brush out that area there. And I do like how it's affected that manhole cover, so I'm going to do the same to the bricks here. Again, levels adjustment layer, invert it, Control or Command I, grab my brush, set it to white, and start painting over the bricks, but I can't see what I'm doing, so press backslash, and just do a very rough paint over the road here. Trying carefully not to go over that manhole cover where I've already changed the dynamic range of, so I don't want to affect that again. That's not too bad. As I said, you can always adjust this later afterwards as well. You can always just get a rough idea of what it's doing first and then change it later. So here I've got the histogram of just the area that I've painted, so I can brighten up my bricks and tone it down to match the rest of the image. And you can see it's improved the dynamic range of the bricks really well without changing anything else in the image. You can see these highlights here really help to draw the eye into the center of the image, and it matches with the tone of the manhole cover as well. So we've got 4 different levels adjustments here, used very selectively for different areas of the image. If you want, you don't have to stop there. You could do the buildings, you could do the food truck and the car, or anything else that's in your image. There's no real limit to how small you can make these adjustments in different places. But if I just show you the before and after, so that's our before, very flat and underexposed, and that's our after. So just with 4 levels adjustment layers, it's made a huge difference to the look of this image. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and you can go off and use this technique for however you want in your own images. I'm Kieran Stone from Project RAWcast, and I'll see you next time.